Welcome into another fantasy football intervention quick shot. I'm Taylor Cornell, and today I'm talking some Cam Newton.
All right, who wants a shot? Quick shots.
Benched last week against San Francisco. Been a bit of a disappointment for fantasy and for real life New England Patriots fans. 2020 hasn't quite been what we maybe hoped for Cam Newton. And after the benching, some people are wondering if Cam Newton is washed. I'm not so sure he is. If you want to find a season similar stats wise to what we've seen so far in 2020, you have to look no further than 2017. Just 3 years ago, Cam Newton put up some 16 game stats that are pretty similar to what his 16 game pace is so far for 2020. And I don't remember anybody saying Cam Newton was washed in 2017. Now, look, Cam Newton doesn't always do it very pretty when it comes to putting up fantasy production. He's already had 4 games this season under 175 passing yards. Of course, he did have a random almost 400-yard passing day back in week 2, but that was the same case in 2017. Cam Newton led the Panthers to an 11-5 record, and it production-wise wasn't that far off from what we've seen so far this year. He had 8 games in 2017 where he was under that 175 passing yard threshold, and he only had 2 games that season where he even surpassed 300 passing yards. I think Newton's demise this year is being a little overblown, recency bias taking over a bit after the really ugly Week 7 game. But in 3 of his 5 games, Cam Newton has put up fantasy point totals of 25, 36, and 18 fantasy points for leagues that award 6 points per passing touchdown. And he's averaged 12 rushes, 66 yards, and had at least 1 rushing touchdown in 3 of those 5 games. He's really had 2 bad games, one not so great against Las Vegas and a really bad one against San Francisco that has dragged down some of his fantasy production on the season. In those 2 games alone, he has averaged just 7 rushing attempts and 23 rushing yards. So that's really hurt his fantasy production as he hasn't had the rushing in those games to kind of supplement his passing when it's a little bit off. Coming up on the schedule, though, Cam Newton will see Buffalo, and Buffalo's given up an average of 126 rushing yards a game. Now, we assume when we look at rushing yards that most of those are coming from the opponent's running back, but for New England, there's a lot of question marks in that backfield right now. Sony Michel is a shell of himself from what he was at Georgia. There's some questions around Damian Harris and what his involvement will be going forward. Cam Newton may be the best running option on that team, especially when they get close to the end zone. And this Buffalo defense yielded 42 rushing yards and a touchdown to Tannehill, 36 rushing yards to Mahomes. And then after Buffalo, New England takes on the New York Jets. And we know the Jets are a mess of a team. And looking at their defense, they've allowed games already of 57, 31, and 61 rushing yards to opposing quarterbacks and giving up a couple of rushing touchdowns as well. So there's a couple matchups coming up here on the schedule that hopefully Cam Newton will be able to correct some of his mistakes and at least have that rushing floor return for him to help offset some of his negative passing that we see. And we don't really need Cam Newton pumping out multiple 300-yard passing days to be fantasy relevant. We saw that in 2017. He was the quarterback 2 that season and had less than 175 passing yards in half of his games. Even with struggling to touch 200 passing yards, his rushing floor is what keeps him fantasy relevant. And before the disaster this past Sunday in San Francisco, Cam Newton was averaging over 23 fantasy points per game. That would have had him top 12 at the quarterback position in fantasy. So now is not the time to be panic selling Cam Newton. I believe brighter days are ahead sooner rather than later for him. And if you aren't a believer long-term, wait a couple of games and the price should kind of correct itself there and then you can sell. Now is not the time to be going out and trying to move Cam Newton coming off a game where he was benched and replaced by Jarrett Stidham. Wait a couple games, then you can move them. For those that are looking for some depth in Superflex leagues especially, Cam Newton's a great target. We mentioned the recency bias before. We're all guilty of it. A lot of people looking at a game in Week 7 where he returned negative fantasy points in many leagues. So that recency bias is real. you might be able to get a discount on him. And I think Cam Newton is a top 15 quarterback option going forward for the rest of the season. Hopefully this insight's been helpful for you. Be sure to subscribe to our Fantasy Football Intervention YouTube channel. Check out our other videos we have out there, some other quick shots, six-pack podcasts. There's all sorts of stuff out there. And you can find us out on Twitter at @joinourcircle_.